We'd love to welcome everyone as we go through the session today to share any questions that you might have or any reflections, any feelings. A couple of wonderful members of our team will be continuing to pay attention to the chat all the way through. And so we'll be trying to capture those and bring those also to the attention of our two wonderful guests today. And maybe with that, I'll start just by welcoming again what has turned into a pretty amazing duo and duet between Parker and Sharon, and welcome them back with our group today. And Parker, Sharon, maybe you both would be up for checking in with each other and with the group. They've become very polite with each other.
Yes,
Sharon,
really, you're going to have to choose, I'm afraid.
Sharon, I'd love to invite you to check in first.
Thank you so much. I'm good. I had an interesting period of self-reflection just this morning where I realized how many parts there are to my life. There's me as a person, with friends and meditation practice, and then there's me as the co-founder of an institution, which is next door and closed right now. And with its 50th anniversary looming not too many years from now, and I keep thinking, will it, happen? And it's just so many disparate parts, but I actually feel whole, which was a very big reflection on my part, because people sometimes ask me to describe myself at the age of 18, which is when I first went to India to learn meditation. And the word I always choose is fragmented. That I just felt like I was fragmented. And it's been, all these years of practice of kind of weaving a sense of coherence in my being. And I realized, even in this time when it would be so easy to feel all these different roles and demands and identities, and I actually feel kind of together, so I was very happy to see that.
Thanks, Sharon. So as for me, I'm really glad to be back with this group. I spend a lot of time thinking about folks like you who are doing good work out there and supporting important causes as best you're able right now. I continue to feel what I am, which is one of the lucky ones. I'm sitting in the same space where I've made my living for the last 40 years of independent working as a writer and a teacher. And so many people, the vast majority of people, don't have that luxury. For them, being in their home space, their literal physical home space is a luxury they can't afford, or they're very eager to get free of in order to get back to work and back to all the things that nurture them. I think the other piece, Aaron and Sharon and everyone, of where I am right now is I continue to meditate very fruitfully on something that I mentioned, I think, last time we were together, which is that being in a high risk category because of age and underlying health conditions, I have a deepened sense of identity with people around the globe who live their lives from birth to death in high risk categories amid pandemics of another sort: racism, misogyny, structural inequality, poverty, and all the rest. I don't fool myself that I can know or feel exactly what they feel. I can't. There's no way for me to do that. But even for someone like me, a tiny window into their lives matters. And I have really been trying to deepen my sense of, that we really are all in this together, although some of us are much more heavily impacted, as always. than others. And I've been trying to track that into what its consequences are for me in this moment and beyond the pandemic.
Thank you, Parker. Thank you, Sharon. One thing that just is starting with even a base for today's conversation and where you both are going to take us. One of the things that's been really beautiful, just in the way that this community has been together, has been this sort of like sense of having a safe space together here, a space that feels like home. And that's been particularly the case with you. I think it's been wonderful for us to keep coming back to you at intervals as the last few months have unfolded. I was wondering if you guys had any reflections about that, because for you as well, it's been, you like there's a part of enjoying coming back to this group. And so maybe we could just invite you both to share that as well.
Well, I think we established a good order of speaking with the
Oh yeah,
question,
I knew that was going to happen.
So let's continue.
I knew that was going to happen.
Well, if I speak first, I'm going to get a spiritual lesson, and I don't want another one right now. You know? I'm just saying.
Well, I too feel really lucky to be with you all, and certainly to be with Parker, which is a great delight and a rare delight. You know, like I've seen him more in these last few weeks than I have in a very long time, ever, maybe, probably. And so it does feel really good. And I think what I was talking about before, that sense of some kind of inner coherence or wholeness is like a sense of home. And of course, it's a difficult and challenging time in so many ways, even for somebody as privileged as I am. I mean, I'm in the countryside in a house that I don't own, but I have kind of lifetime ability to live in. And, you know, next door to a retreat center, while closed, the staff is still there and they're cooking. And, you know, I mean, it's still, you know, I face the same uncertainty as people have, the things I'm accustomed to. Like Massachusetts, which is the state I'm in, yesterday issued its first guidelines for people, you know, being able to leave home and in the ordinary sense of home, and you know, go out, and what businesses can open and things like that. And so there are these whole long lists of conditions, and at the bottom it always said, and senior citizens are recommended not to do this. You know, like senior citizens are recommended to stay at home unless they have to go out for medical reasons or food. And then, you know, the projection for the next phase, and then the bottom it said the same thing. And then the next phase, and the bottom it said the same thing. And I said, okay, you know, life as I once knew it may not resume for a very long time, if ever. And so where do I find that sense of belonging and comfort and everything we associate with the word home? I mean, the words I associate the most are probably authenticity. It's the place where I should be most myself, least pretentious or putting anything on, and that deep sense of belonging, which is like a comfort. And I realize that I have worked really hard to try to build that within, and that I'm going to have to take refuge in that in the coming time. So it's really belonging for me. It's belonging, comfort, ease, and kind of honesty of authenticity. And that's what home means to me.
Yeah, as always, I learn from Sharon as she reflects on these things, and I would affirm everything that she just said. I was sitting here thinking back on my own journey, which has been a very, in many ways, an unconventional journey. I always wanted, you know, to be accepted and to be loved and to be part of, you know, something larger than myself. And yet I was always making unconventional decisions, which set me off on the unchosen path. There wasn't even a path half the time. I was trailblazing through the woods. And so with that kind of a journey, vocationally and personally, I think comes a deepening realization that I have to find home inside myself. And that realization is deepened with, as one meditates on one's own mortality, which is, you know, that journey that obviously you can only take alone. And at age 81, that's something I think about, not infrequently. But the truth about me is I've been thinking about it ever since I was 18, not in a morbid way, but in a way that has enhanced my appreciation for life, my gratitude for life, and for, you know, little graces, little blessings. So the pandemic is deepening that sense that the home I need and want must be inside of me. But at the same time, I'm surrounded, because of life experience, by cautions not to turn that into a gated community or a walled garden where, you know, no one can get in except people who look like me, think like me, come from the same places I do, you know, operate within my comfort zone, et cetera, et cetera. I have to be, I think one of the poems that I sort of live by, I think a lot of us do, have done for some years, is Rumi's The Guest House. And I suspect many of you will know that poem, where he basically says, you're a guest house, buddy. And every morning, unwelcome guests show up in the form of feelings or remembered experiences or fears about the future. Welcome them in, because they each have a message for you, even if they destroy the living room and empty your refrigerator. You know, that isn't quite what Rumi said, but you know what I mean. And so I have this sense that part of my task in feeling at home inside of myself is to welcome a cast of characters in there. And one of the things I learned along the way about dreams is that they often present you with that cast of characters, and you should get to know them, and you should inquire, turn to curiosity about what their role is in your life, why they're popping up as conversation partners. Even the ones that seem threatening may have a gift to offer. So those are some of the themes that I'm working on. And again, grateful for the fact that I have long experience with as much solitude as someone who's married and has kids and grandkids and all kinds of domestic and civic responsibilities, as much solitude as such a person can get. I mean, at one time, as a great follower of Thomas Merton, I wanted to drive right down to Kentucky and join his monastery. And then I realized that as a Quaker who was married with kids, I wouldn't meet the sort of entry requirements. You know, they wouldn't even give me the gatekeeper's job. And so from there, I had to find out what a kind of monastic sensibility might mean for me. And as a writer, for 40 years, spending half my time in the solitude of writing, that's been a welcome discipline and a place of comfort. So, yeah.
Thank you, Parker.
Not easy to describe, but real for me.
I'm wondering if it might be possible to pass this now to Sharon, maybe to take us through a practice, Sharon, around drawing on resources. So.
Yes, certainly. I mean, if I could just say more as an introduction to that. I find that, you know, I've been teaching since 1974, and the two least popular meditation instructions I ever give, I found, is first instruction I learned from one of my most fierce, intense teachers, actually, where he said, and I can go into this more later, but basically, if you're dealing with something like physical pain or emotional pain, the idea isn't to just get overwhelmed by it, but to kind of pace yourself and figure out, in a way, resource you can bring to it so that your relationship to it is different. And that's sort of the whole point of that. And there's kind of a corollary instruction in loving kindness meditation, which is its own method, where is it if you're offering loving kindness to someone you find difficult, that you not start with the most unthinkable person in the entire universe right away, because you'll get overwhelmed, and that there are building blocks to put in place so that by the time you are there, you're not thinking it's a question of giving in, for example, or abandoning yourself, but it's a different kind of balance. And so, like I said, that those are not popular instructions, and I've been giving them forever. And people often say, well, that means you think I can't do the real thing, or I'm a coward, I don't have enough strength to just kind of endure this pain endlessly, or whatever. And it's really not the point. The point is that relationship, which can be one of learning and compassion and have a different kind of energy and so on. So what we do is we spend some time kind of building that sense of inner resource or inner home, so that we can be a guest house in a different way. Those guests are going to come no matter what we want. And the question is, how are we going to be with them? Is there any kind of graciousness, or speaking of, Thomas Merton in Gethsemane, hospitality, which is like their creed. And so, even though it makes some people uncomfortable, and I saw this just like 2 days ago, somebody wrote me and said, I don't like that kind of reflection of like, what's the good within me, or, it makes me uncomfortable. Nonetheless, that's what it's about. So I would like to guide, however uncomfortable it might make you, I apologize, just a short exercise in that kind of reflection. Okay. So if you want to sit comfortably and close your eyes or not, it might be useful to have something like the feeling of the breath, or something happening in your body that's comfortable, that's not, painful, as a kind of resting place for your attention. And just let your attention be there in a light way, so that you have a kind of anchor. And see if you can just call to mind something from yesterday or today that you have to be grateful for. It could be something seemingly small, but just what comes to mind. And notice any commentary that arises. Oh, it was all right, but not enough, or not as good as they had, or whatever. And just see if you can relinquish those thoughts gently and actually absorb the knowledge of what you have to be grateful for. Just one thing. And then one good thing you've done. yesterday or today. Just to acknowledge it. And if nothing comes to mind, the fact that you're doing this contemplation counts. Or the fact that you're on this call, it counts. Just see how it makes you feel. This is not conceit or arrogance or pride. It's taking delight in goodness, which is also available to us. And look at that, we have the power of some choice. See if you can call to mind some activity, some field of study, something you do that feeds your soul, your heart. Maybe you haven't done it in a while, but it is something known to you. And let that in. That there is this possibility. And then something you'd kind of like to start doing that is actually at hand. Something that's realistic. And take that in. And just notice how you feel. What does it feel like in your body, in your mind? And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes and we'll end the exercise.
Thank you, Sharon. Maybe what we could do is invite people to just share in the chat. If you could just type in how that experience was for you with the meditation that Sharon just led. And Sharon, as people are doing that, maybe we could ask both you and Parker why it's important to resource as we start looking at difficult things.
Can I have Parker begin?
You absolutely can.
Yes, unmute himself.
I'm rarely muted, so that's a surprising experience for me. With gratitude for that exercise, let me say why I think it's important as a prelude to a sort of critical self-examination. And in my case, at least, self-examination always has to involve critique, or it's not honest. We talk about trying to understand our shadow side, and I think if we've touched on something that doesn't make us squirm, then it's probably not our shadow side. It's probably more like a technical problem that has an easy solution. And so for me anyway, I can't go there until I have engaged in the kind of self-resourcing that we were just invited into, reminding myself of, I guess, what I'd call the graces in my life that have been offered by other people and that have come from within me. They provide the backdrop of, the language is tricky here, but use whatever word works for you. I'd call it the backdrop of blessing against which I can look at more readily at some of the spikier stuff that goes on in me and around me. Let me use to be very concrete, let me loop back to what I said early on about my awareness now of how I'm in a huge community of people at high risk, though I'm at a lot less risk than most of them in terms of the pandemics they live in, and I don't. I have a little window into what that experience is like. I've spent most of my adult life, from the day I got out of grad school and walked away from academia and into community organizing in Washington, D.C., on behalf of racial justice and equity. I've spent most of my life devoted in one way or another to the richness of diversity and the way in which otherness expands our lives, doesn't threaten our lives, it enlarges our lives, and the importance of forging a sense of community in all of that. So what's this business about me at age 81 having a new sense of that identity? Well, the shadow side of all of that has been that there have been many times in my life when I've had to catch myself and say, Parker, you're trying to do this as a gift to other people rather than something in which you have deeply personal existential stakes. Because to be a gift giver makes you feel good, whereas having deeply personal existential stakes in joining that larger community and putting something on the line for it makes you very, very nervous. You know, it suggests that you are on the edge of giving up some of the perks that come with being who you are. And time and again, you've learned that doesn't work because the people you're trying to work with sense that shadow side motivation in you, sense the ego trip you're on. And they don't come along. Why should they? They basically sense stuff that they can't trust. So what do you need to do to become a more trustworthy person? What can you put on the line that invites this to be not only a gift to everyone, including you, but a transformational experience of vulnerability in your life, right? Because that's where trust comes from. So I don't think I need to say a whole lot more to say that that's a spiky realization about oneself. That has sharp edges in it. That's not something that one concludes as a sociologist or a psychologist or any other through any other sort of intellectual activity, that's one that can be genuine and actionable in the world only if it's really real for you. And so given who I am, it's always easy to backslide on that one. And I've had to come around once again and ask myself that shadow side question in this most recent experience of being at high risk with many others. What more can you put on the line for that? Because there's a piece of you that's still thinking about this as a kind of noble awareness, when in fact, it just is part of the human package.
Thank you, Parker. Sharon?
Thank you so much, Parker. I mean, maybe just to add to that and also go back to what I was saying before, so much seems to me to be about relationship. And in my earlier life, not when I was very young, but when I was, say, in my 20s, early 20s, I didn't really understand that so well. And I had spent time earlier than that just kind of avoiding what was painful or not even recognizing it inside myself or so very much around me. And then it was like this big revelation to open, and that was very important. But it wasn't the end of the story either, because then I was drowning. And so later on, it became important to build that sense of resource so that I could more honestly and in a sustained way be with painful experience, my own or others, and even just to call my own painful rather than bad or wrong or like, why are you feeling that? That you shouldn't be feeling that. To recognize those states of anger and fear and so on, they were painful states, took some kind of inner resource building. And I thought, oh, I'm copping out, this is wrong. I shouldn't spend time doing this. And but that was wrong. I really needed to kind of balance out that approach. And I think about this beautiful quotation from the Buddha where he said something like, the mind, your mind, my mind, the mind is naturally radiant and pure. The mind is shining. It's because of visiting forces that we suffer. And there are a few different elements of that. One is these forces, overwhelming fear and anger and so on. They're just visiting. They may visit a lot, but they're just visiting. They come and go. And the other thing is, he didn't say it's because of visiting forces that you're like a terrible person. He said it's because of visiting forces that we suffer. And I love that from the first time I heard it, because I could imagine myself being at home, happily minding my own business, and I hear the doorbell ring. And I get up and I open the door, and there's, let's say, overwhelming anger, appearing, or this terrible fear. And I fling open the door. It's like I forget who actually lives there. I fling open the door and I say, welcome home. It's all yours. Or more commonly, I'd slam the door shut and try to pretend I never heard the doorbell. And somehow that visitor would find its way through the window or down the chimney or something. And so it didn't work. And I realized that there was actually a skill in learning how to open the door and greet that visitor, remembering who actually lives there, that this is born of conditions, it's actually coming and going, that to get lost in it and overwhelmed by it doesn't make me a bad person, it means I suffer. And there's even a kind of hospitality, that one can have, like the guest house. It's like, oh, hello, would you like a cup of tea? Don't think it's your house, but and it just clarified things for me that, oh, this is not second best practice. This is really how one gives a gift to oneself that enables you to keep relating to others in a better way and serving and so on.
Yeah. Aaron, is there a moment for me to just add a piece to what Sharon just so beautifully said? The thought that was evoked in me as she was speaking. I think some people, I've known people who will regard this kind of practice as masochistic. Like, why should I look, right, at the negative side of myself? And I think it's really important to answer that question for ourselves. And for me, you know, the answer is on two levels. If I don't look at this stuff in myself, as Sharon says, it comes in the window or down the chimney and eventually paralyzes me with my own sense of inadequacy. I mean, how many people do we know who just say, I've tried to take on important causes, but I'm not enough. I don't have what it takes. And so to really confront your own limitations and work with them, acknowledge them, embrace them, learn what you can from them before they shut you down is in service of service. It's not masochistic. Anything you can do to take care of yourself is eventually being done on behalf of other people. Because you're going to impact other people with whatever you're carrying or refusing to carry. And it's not a pretty picture when you're refusing to carry key parts of yourself. And then one final thing. For me, all of this is framed by an understanding that wholeness, a word that came up a little bit ago, does not mean perfection. Wholeness means embracing all of our limitations and broken parts as integral to who we are, as our gifts and strengths are. I didn't say that very pretty, but I still think it's true. That wholeness, as a wonderful woman named M.C. Richards, whose writing some of you may know, once pointed out to me, she said, you know, Parker, whole apple juice isn't the kind that's pasteurized that you can see right through. Whole apple juice has stems and skin and seeds and everything in it. It's murky, like the Mississippi River, but that's whole. And if you can understand that in yourself, you're going to have a life, which at the time I needed. So.
Thank you, Parker. We're going to bring it back to you, Sharon. And I'm going to use a phrase from Parker to set this up, at least to set up your setup for this. And I think the idea was looking at grace and resource before self-examination. And so I'll just pass it over to you now to take us into the second part of the practice for today.
Well, I think it may not even be sequential. I mean, I think it's that sense of opening the door and seeing the visitor, maybe even inviting a visitor that you know you've been kind of avoiding for a while, and but seeing that visitor in a different way. So there's some kind of effort to retranslate when you see something difficult arising within you. Instead of calling it bad or wrong or weak or whatever we might tend to call it, to actually substitute the word painful or suffering. So that's part of it. And some of it is a sense of titrating. It's pacing yourself. I learned this from one of my most fierce teachers, who was a Burmese monk named Sayadaw U Pandita, who we brought to the Insight Meditation Society in 1984 to lead a 3-month retreat. And he was demanding and intense and fierce. He was a wonderful teacher, but that was his personality. And somebody asked him one day, how long should I pay attention to physical pain before I move my attention to something that's easier to be with, something that brings me some relief? Listening to sound or feeling your whole body or doing loving kindness for others and something like that. And it was a powerful question because we use physical pain as a template for emotional pain and disappointment and heartbreak and all kinds of things. And so how long do you hang in there with it before you like take a break and then maybe come back. And I thought, given his personality, he was going to say you should be with the pain until you fall over. But to my astonishment, he said, don't be with it for all that long. Be with it, kind of refresh yourself, come back to it, refresh yourself. And I couldn't have been more shocked, because he was like the last thing in the universe from somebody who would say something just to be nice. I mean, really not his style. And he said it's not wrong to just like be with the pain and be with the pain and be with the pain, but you'll likely get exhausted. So why not build in balance all along the way to the best of your ability? Because that's the point. It's not just to suffer it, but to create kind of a different holding environment if you can. More loving, more compassionate, more present, more balanced in the face of that. So that's what these exercises are really about. It's about having some sense of comfort, admitting some difficulty, being able to move in and out in as skillful a way as you can. Okay, so if you want, again, we'll just sit for a few minutes and see if you can sit comfortably. Again, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Is there a place in your body that feels like a refuge where you can simply be? Maybe that's the breath, something else. Feeling the earth supporting you. Feeling space surrounding you. Remembering the good within you, the good in your life. And in your mind, just bring up a recent disappointment. It doesn't have to have been very grave, but something recently that has let you down in some way. You can bring back the sense of it. Notice what happens in your body. What does it feel like? Notice what happens in your mood. Notice the kinds of thoughts that come up. Are they mostly about the future? It's never going to work out or whatever. So the best of your ability, be an observer of kind of the dynamic interplay of that state. And if you find yourself judging yourself, I shouldn't feel this, I should be over it, whatever. This is a bad thing to feel. See if you can make that translation. Well, this is a painful thing to feel. And see if you can bring your attention to something that is more easeful in your body. Remembering the good within you, something like that. Remembering your capacity to grow, to learn, to change. If you have a physical limitation, an injury, something painful, admit that into your consciousness. And again, instead of getting lost in judgment about it, recognize this hurts in some way. Also notice if you completely identify with it. This is all that I am. See if you can relinquish that. When you move to switch your attention to something that is happening in your body that feels whole, complete, at ease, or the fact that the earth is supporting you, that space is touching you on all sides, that you're breathing. That you have the capacity to not be so alone. And let your attention move back and forth. The acknowledgement of what's difficult and the touching on something that is in a way bigger. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes.
Sharon, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll just invite everyone to share into the chat if you could type in any things that you noticed in going between those two things, just as reflections, any questions that came up. And Sharon, Parker, I think one thing that you also both mentioned that feels important to touch on, this is a community, we are a community of people that are very oriented towards taking the things that we learn and then sharing that with other people. And I was wondering if I could just invite any sort of like thoughts or reflections you might have about sharing this with other people as well. And Sharon, do you want me to ask one of the two of you? Do you want me to direct this one?
I wanted to ask Parker first.
There we go. Parker, this one just got directed to you.
Yeah, it occurred to me that Sharon and I basically have a good cop, bad cop routine. So here I am. I want to say that, that sharing this with other people depends first upon what this is, and I'm going to translate that as an invitation to the kind of awareness, self-awareness of both the light and the shadow in us, that it plays such a critical role in our presence in the world. And maybe a few things about how one tries to move in that direction. And I think what's very, very clear to all of us is that self-awareness is not something you can give to other people. It begins with having it yourself in some reasonable measure, because you can't give what you don't have at this level of life. And I've sat with many people who are resistant to the kind of thing that, the kind of invitations that Sharon just extended to us in both of her practices, who say, come on, I ought to be out there in the world doing my work. And my response has always been, well, if your work involves anything like helping people get in touch with both their strengths and their obstacles, then you have nothing to give if you can't accept or receive those opportunities for yourself. You have zero, you got nada. So, you know, either do it for yourself or get a job you know something about. So I may not put it that directly, but especially if they're paying me, which they're not under these circumstances. So I can speak candidly. And so what you can do was just modeled by Sharon. You can create an invitational space, which I always define as a space that's safe for the human soul to show up. Soul goes by many different names in many different languages. For secular humanists, it's identity and integrity. For Thomas Merton, it was true self. For Quakers, it's the inner light. Whatever for Hasidic Jews, the spark of the divine, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. But that you call it something, I'd call it the being and human being. That's the least invited part of ourselves in our daily rounds. We're invited to show up with our intellects, with our emotions, you know, with our skills, with our egos, for sure, but very rarely with our soul, our identity and integrity, whatever its name may be. And I think that such spaces have to be carefully defined and facilitated because they're countercultural spaces. They swim against the tide of how we ordinarily are present to one another. And when we default to the cultural norms, very little that's good can happen, or so it seems to me. So here's an example of the kind of spaces that I've tried to create in my work and the disciplines that define them, and it's only a small piece. When I gather people to create safe space for the soul, I announce up front that one of our fundamental ground rules is going to be no fixing, no saving, no advising, and no correcting each other. And there's always somebody in the circle who in both mock horror and real horror screams, well, what in heaven's name are we going to do with each other? You've just taken away the only things we enjoy doing and the only things we know how to do. And I'll say, yeah, that's true, because those are the things that shut down the soul, that send it scurrying back into the underbrush. The human soul does not want to be fixed, saved, advised, or corrected. It wants to be seen. It wants to be heard. It wants to be witnessed. It seems pretty clear to me that one of the most fundamental human wounds is nobody sees me. Nobody hears me. I'm invisible. I'm voiceless. And so to create a space like this where the behaviors that make people feel invisible and voiceless are taken away as permissible. And you have a facilitator who's strong and authentic about enforcing that ground rule and really, really clear as to how important it is, and just doesn't let it happen. And who can create a culture with the help of others where it doesn't happen is a huge gift to people. And I've seen this happen for 35 years, 40 years in the work that I've been doing with other people. And I profoundly believe in this principle. What we do in those spaces, instead of speaking to each other in ways that shut down the soul with our fixes and saves, is we learn to ask honest, open questions that evoke a deeper voice from the other person. And an honest, open question is, is an art, because most of us are trained to ask questions that are leading questions that are trying to advance our agenda, or promote something, and plant an idea in the mind of the other person. I always use the example of, have you thought about seeing a therapist is not an honest, open question, It's a piece of advice in disguise, and that's forbidden in these spaces that are safe for the soul. But if you ask, have you had an experience like this before? You have no idea what the right answer to that question is. And if they've had an experience like that they're willing to share, an honest, open question might be, did you learn anything from that experience that you might find helpful in the current moment? These are questions that Nell Morton once labeled as questions that hear people into deeper speech, which is a huge gift, to get listened to in a sustained way by people who have intentionally set aside their agendas. So I know that we're hard on our time here, Aaron, and I'll say one more thing. For me, the ultimate metaphor of what I'm trying to describe, it has to do with remembering the experience many of us have had of sitting at the bedside of a dying person. Because if at no other point in our lives, that's the point at which we realize we don't have a fix, a save, an advice, or a correction for this situation. Those tools are stripped from us by the nature of the deathbed situation itself. We, despite our egos, despite our pretensions, in those moments, we know that we don't have that a fix to offer. And so what we find ourselves doing, and I've asked hundreds of people about this, the only answer they've ever given me is, I'm simply trying to be present. I'm trying to bear witness. I'm trying to accompany, a person on a journey that only he or she can take, and to be fully present to that. I have deep confidence that that's a very important way for us to learn to be with one another before we die. And yet it's so rare before we die. I don't know yet how that feels to the person who's doing the dying, but I have a hunch. I have a hunch that a faithful presence of someone who's not scared of you in these critical moments in life, even short of death, gives you the confidence, that gives you a sense that this person believes you have the inner resources to see this through, to make this journey, whatever it may be. And that's what I think ultimately is the gift we can give to others this side of death, as well as on the deathbed itself.
Parker, thank you. Sharon, thank you for passing that to Parker as well. So just to bring us to a very quick wrap so that we can respect the hour for everyone. Next week, our session is going to be with the head of the Vienna Voice Choir and will involve singing and well-being. We're super excited about this. It continues to weave in art and well-being into the sessions that we're doing every week. Parker, Sharon, you both are wonderful, both individually, and it's remarkable watching the two of you together as a duet. And for everyone on the call, the way we've been checking out, and also partly for Parker and Sharon to get a tiny glimpse of the community that's together here, we've been turning on our videos and microphones, and as we've been checking out, just saying goodbye wherever we're checking out from. Thank you, everyone.